at Dodd-Frank today?
They do. They're taking up, I believe it's just one bill with three policies in it, and it's aimed directly at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and it would create a board and some other changes.
And we'll find out more as we go to the House of Representatives.
The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., July 21, 2011. I hereby appoint the Honorable Rick Crawford to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 5, 2011, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Rangel, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that I have permission to devise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Good morning, my colleagues. Like most of you, I have taken so many things around this wonderful capital for granted, and this beautiful statement, "In God we trust," unfortunately for me, has been one of them. It has not really struck me like the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag or the Star-Spangled Banner or so many other things. But I think that now is the time that we really need God to guide us to do the right and the moral thing. And the reason we have to do it because we're dealing with something that is basic to all religions and faiths, and that is our responsibility to make certain that we balance our budget, do what is fiscally necessary for our great nation to survive, but also to do it in such a way that the poor and the vulnerable, who have nothing to do with the crisis that we face, are not hurt. So I guess this is what we're talking about when we say, "In God we trust." But God works through us. We are the tools. We have the responsibility of the missionaries. We don't have lobbyists that comes down and to say to protect those people. And I guess this is one of the reasons why this saying here is a constant reminder to us that even though we're carried away with our ability to create statutes, that we respect our court system and the Supreme Court, that in the final analysis, it's the higher authority of morality that should be guiding all of us. Recently, I called upon religious leaders to help us in this guidance, to make the right decisions. Christians, Catholic, Protestants, Muslims, Mormons, Jews, and Gentiles. And I was so pleased that a long and dear friend named Jim Wallace, he's a Lutheran pastor, was an advisor to the president, and just yesterday he brought in a group of ministers to help the president to make the moral decision as he struggles so hard to make the proper decision as it affects our budget and how we're going to reduce our deficit. But the things that he had cited, like Matthew's, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for me, that you did for me, the least of these brothers and sisters of mine you did for me." What it is that whatever you have done to assist a poor person or those who are not as strong physically and financially as you and I, that you really did this, in a sense, for Jesus because you have done the right thing. And then he goes on to have something that sounds like statutes when it says, "Woe to those who enact unjust statutes and who write oppressive decrees." Oppressive decrees. Depriving the needy of judgment and robbing poor people of their rights. Is health care right? Is Social Security a right? Is decent housing, education, the pursuit of happiness, is all of this a right? And does this permeate the entire budget and every decision that we're trying to make? Well, in these statements that he made, we have the Torah that says the same thing. If there's a poor man among your brothers in any towns, we have a responsibility. The Quran indicates, believe in Allah and His messengers and spend on charity. And so, my brothers and sisters, it seemed to me that now is the time for us to really get in touch with the Gang of Six, because it seems like nobody in the House of Representatives have any clue as to what ultimately the President and his advisors will decide. Certainly the Senate doesn't know what we will decide, but somehow we should include not just the question of revenue, not just the question of trillions of dollars to be cut, but in the course of these negotiations to think of the lesser of our brothers and sisters. Remember that it's a part of our very lives in saying that in God we trust, and to know that you just can't cut services without losing jobs. In other words, when you have people who are jobless, homeless, who lost their savings, these are God's children, and they need hope for the future. So thank you for once again giving me this opportunity, and what words could better express what I've been trying to say, and that is, Mr. Speaker, in God we trust.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. On Tuesday, the House passed H.R. 2560, the Cut, Cap, and Balance bill. I was amazed by the $120 billion approved to fund the war on terror. I, like many of my colleagues, agree that we must continue to fight terrorism, but I do not understand why we are funding the civil war in Afghanistan. I do not understand why members of Congress want to spend $10 billion a month in Afghanistan when our people back home are struggling. I can assure you the American people do not understand it either. In June, a poll was conducted by the Pew Research Center where 56% of the American people polled said, "Bring our troops home now, not later." Mr. Speaker, I brought back the picture of Edie and Stephanie Baldoff. Their father, Sergeant Kevin Baldoff, and Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Palmer died, and that continues to haunt me. And the way they died continues to haunt me, and that's the reason I wanted to bring this picture down here again. They were given the task to train Afghans to be policemen. The two were shot and murdered by one of the trainees. What really haunts me is the email Sergeant Baldoff sent to his wife the day before he was shot and killed. And I quote the email, "I don't trust them for anything, not for anything at all. Why in the world do we continue to send our young men and women overseas to get themselves blown up, shot, and murdered by people they're trying to train? These little girls are standing at their daddy's funeral at Arlington Cemetery." Mr. Speaker, that brings me to the last email I've received from a retired general, Marine general. I called him about 20 months ago and I said, "I made a mistake on Iraq. I don't want to make one on Afghanistan. Will you advise me?" He said, "Yes, I will." Let me read the one that just ties into this issue of this sergeant and this Marine colonel being murdered by a trainee in Afghanistan. He said, and I quote the general, "Get real with training an Army and police force. All we are doing is training eventual new members of the Taliban." He further stated, "Trainers are doing a wonderful job, but we don't have the time to make an Army or a police force in Afghanistan." The general closed his email to me by saying this, "Every day someone dies. Every day someone dies. It is time to bring our troops home from Afghanistan. How many more children have to cry at a mom or dad's grave site because their mother or daddy went to Afghanistan to prop up a corrupt leader named Karzai that we send $10 billion a month to. I hope no other children have to cry like Edie and Stephanie. That brings me to my close, Mr. Speaker. Several weeks ago, Eugene Robertson, in his editorial titled Afghan Strategy, Let's Go, and I quote Mr. Robertson, "We wanted to kill or capture Osama bin Laden, and we did. Even so, say the hawks, we have to stay in Afghanistan because of the dangerous instability across the border in nuclear-armed Pakistan. But does anyone believe the war in Afghanistan has made Pakistan more safe? No, it has not. In fact, it's more fragile now than it's ever been. The threat from Afghanistan is gone. Bring the troops home." Eugene Robertson is not a conservative. We see him on TV all the time. And I will say that he nailed it with this editorial. The threat from Afghanistan is gone. Bring them home. Mr. Speaker, as I close always on the floor of the House, for these little girls who have lost their father and all the children who have lost their fathers and moms over in Afghanistan and Iraq, I ask God to please bless our men and women in uniform. I ask God to please bless the families of our men and women in uniform. I ask God in His loving arms to hold the families who have given a child dying for freedom in Afghanistan and Iraq. I ask God to please bless the House and Senate that we will do what is right in the eyes of God for His people. I ask God to give strength, wisdom, and courage to Mr. Obama that he will do what is right in the eyes of God for His people. And I'll say 3 times, God please, God please, God please continue to bless America. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. DeFazio, for 5 minutes.
Colleagues, we are truly through the looking glass here into a strange world. The Gang of 6 has supposedly met the President's requirements that we would have $3 billion in cuts and $1 billion in revenues. But actually, they are cutting taxes. Now, how does that work? Well, that only works inside the Washington, D.C. Beltway. When you reduce revenues, you'll increase revenues because you pretend that you wouldn't have had those revenues otherwise. A little bit complicated, isn't it? It is incredibly complicated. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors here. There's a simple way to deal with this crisis. We need to rein in spending. We also need to make investments that will put people to work. Now, the Republicans don't think the government can invest in anything that puts people to work, except they haven't noticed that we have an infrastructure that's falling apart. We have 20% unemployment in construction and related fields. If we were to begin to invest and rebuild America's infrastructure, all private sector jobs, put those people to work, they start paying taxes, then part of the deficit goes away, and the money was spent on something that will benefit this generation and future generations. But no, they categorize all federal spending the same. They just want to slash it all. So how about a plan that targets investment, putting people back to work, that reduces spending appropriately across the government, and actually pays for all of this with revenues? How could you do that? Simple. Let the Bush tax cuts expire. Let all the Bush tax cuts expire. That's $4 trillion. It's not too complicated. It would take us back to those bad old Clinton years when rich people paid taxes. And the job creators, they call them, they pay taxes. You can't make the job creators pay taxes. It'll ruin the economy. That's what they said when Clinton raised the taxes back in the 90s. Guess what? We ended up with 3.8% unemployment, and we actually balanced the budget and paid down debt. But yes, the wealthy and all Americans carried a fair share of that burden. I'd love to go back to those bad old days. We've been now for a decade living under the theory that reducing taxes creates jobs, especially reducing taxes on billionaires, you know, the job creators, creates jobs. It's not working too well, isn't it? Nope, it's really not working at all. But the Obama administration and the Gang of 6 have apparently bought into this flim-flam. Let's continue the Bush tax cuts. Let's continue this stupid Social Security tax holiday that hasn't created a single job. Sure, there are a lot of American families who can use an extra 20 bucks a week, but their spending 20 bucks a week does not create jobs. And now Obama wants to give employers 20 bucks a week on each employee, saying, well, they'll go out and hire millions if they get an extra $20 a week. Corporations are sitting on $1 trillion of cash, trillions of dollars of cash. They don't need more cash, and for 20 bucks a week, they're not going to go out and hire anybody. So here's the plan. Let the Bush tax cuts expire. That's $4 trillion. We met the targets. We didn't cut Social Security. We didn't cut Medicare. We didn't cut veterans benefits. We didn't cut student financial aid. But we are $4 trillion ahead in this game. And then cancel the stupid Social Security tax holiday, but still borrow the money. We're borrowing the money to give people a Social Security tax holiday. Borrowing the money to put back in the Social Security Trust Fund after we reduce the income. Stop reducing the income to Social Security. Go back to the statutory rate of taxes and guarantee the benefits for people. And borrow instead that $110 billion to rebuild America's infrastructure. $110 billion, that's about 4.7 million jobs. And not just construction jobs, engineering jobs, small business jobs, manufacturing jobs, all across the country. Put America back to work. And that would reduce the deficit by about another 25%. So if we cancel the Bush tax cuts, $4 trillion, okay, we're now at the president's big deal target, which we're not going to meet under the Gang of Six or any of these other constructs around here. Cancel Social Security tax holiday, instead borrow that money one more year, as the president has proposed, invest it in infrastructure, put millions to work, and then when those millions go to work, they will be paying taxes, and that will reduce the deficit by about another quarter. So we've solved 3/4 of the problem without killing programs essential to the American people and without cutting taxes on the job creators. The Gang of Six is proposing that billionaires should see their taxes cut by about 25 or 30%. That will help us balance the budget. Time to get back to the real world and out of Alice in Wonderland.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since 1947, every August, the Little League Baseball World Series is held in South Williamsport, Pennsylvania, within Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District. And each year, Little League International recognizes Little League graduates who have become outstanding citizens and role models as adults for induction into the Little League Museum Hall of Excellence. Among previous recipients of this honor include prominent figures such as Vice President Joe Biden in 2009, General Peter Pace in 2003, and former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani in 2002. This year's ceremony will prove to be extra special. For 2011, Little League International plans to enshrine the first ever Little League graduate known to have received our nation's highest military award, the Medal of Honor. That person is Army Private First Class Ross Andrew McGinnis of Knox, Pennsylvania. Ross McGinnis played second base and outfield for 6 years and is a graduate of Little League in Knox, Pennsylvania, also in the 5th District. In 2006, Army Private First Class Ross McGinnis heroically gave his life to save 4 others from a grenade blast inside a Humvee during operations in Iraqi freedom. On June 2, 2008, McGinnis was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously for his heroic actions. A quote from President George Bush: in a selfless act of bravery in which he was mortally wounded, Private McGinnis covered the live grenade, pinning it between his body and the vehicle and absorbing most of the explosion, the official citation read, which was awarded by President George Bush. McGinnis' mother, Romaine, says baseball taught her son teamwork and a commitment to achieving common goals. Today, because of McGinnis' sacrifice and commitment to others, 4 men will live on to enjoy their families and their futures. Congratulations to you, Ross Andrew McGinnis. We thank you for your service, and may you rest in peace. Thank you to the Little League International for recognizing Mr. McGinnis' heroic achievements. To the McGinnis family, we are proud of your son, a true American hero. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Ohio, Mrs. Capter, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, you know, almost no one in Washington is talking about jobs. For 2 months now, both chambers of the Congress have been locked down in talking about the debt ceiling. Meanwhile, if you look back at the Bush years, America lost over 8 million jobs in the largest recession since the Great Depression, and we've only gotten back about 2 million. 2 million, creating jobs at about 120,000 per month. That is far from where we need to head. But rather than this Congress engaging in intelligent dialogue on how to create jobs, we keep going down these side roads to nowhere, to nowhere. Meanwhile, unemployment just went up, another 10,000 jobs. Every member in both chambers will be judged on not doing the work that the people want us to do. And that is to focus on how to use the power of the federal government to create jobs. If you take a look at what the Republican majority in the House wants to do, they want to cut unemployment benefits. That's not even understandable to any rational person. They want to cut food. I invite any one of them. Come to my district. Come and stand in the food lines. See how it feels. Better yet, help us pack some of the bags and then distribute them and give them to veterans who are coming home from the wars who don't have jobs. Then ask yourself, what are you really doing here? What are you doing here? What about health benefits for people who've fallen out of work and they don't have any more health benefits for their family? Why should we cut there? You know, there are some who like to proudly proclaim they're pro-life. Pro-life doesn't only involve the period before a child is born. It involves the entire life of a person, of a human being, until natural death. I think there are some philosophical questions our members ought to be asking themselves about helping the American people at this point, this critical point in our history. Now, all of us want to produce balanced budgets. When you have full employment, you get balanced budgets, you can get extra, you can pay down your long-term debt. But you don't hear anything up here being talked about jobs. If it were happening, we'd have more job creation, we have less job creation, more people are going on unemployment benefits, so the conversation is totally off base. Let's just look at one sector where America and the federal government could save a lot of money. America as a country spends over $250 billion a year on prescription drugs. And nearly a third of that amount is paid for by the federal government, which means our people paying taxes when they work. Let's look at that pharmaceutical industry. Now, some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are saying, cut Social Security, cut Medicare. They don't talk about trimming the excess profits of the pharmaceutical companies. And you know what? They're not paying their fair share into the federal till. Let's just look at one bag of heparin in a hospital for which Medicare ends up paying over $600. $600. Millions and millions of dollars a year for a product, a blood thinner, that's been off patent for years. It's made in China. The ingredients are made in China. They're not even made here. Do you realize how much money a couple companies are making off of selling just that one product? Celebrex, for treating arthritis for an average patient's pay, we're paying $148 a month. For Lipitor, for those trying to lower cholesterol, your patient, $122 a month. If you take a look at the profits of Pfizer, Pfizer made $8.3 billion in profits, and its CEO made $25 million last year, just in what he's willing to admit. Johnson & Johnson made $13.3 billion in profits, while their CEO walked away with $29 million. Other big drug makers like Abbott Labs, $4.6 billion. These are with B's. These aren't with M's. These aren't millions. These are billions. And Eli Lilly, $5 billion. Federal government is just forking over all the time. And the federal government is the pharmaceutical industry's biggest customer, and the industry surely knows it. Why doesn't the federal government use its purchasing power to get better bids on these drugs and have competitive bidding in order to purchase? We did that back in the 1990s We haven't done it since. There's plenty of ways to get the funds to try to balance the budget, but the most important way to balance the budget is to help Americans get back to work. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Paulson, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I should consent to address the House.
Have
Mr. Speaker, I come to the floor of the House to honor and remember an American hero, Marine Lance Corporal Robert S. Greninger of Greenfield, Minnesota, who died last week after an IED attack in Afghanistan and Helmand Province. As we grieve the loss of one of our finest citizens who loved being a Marine and share our grief with his widow Ashley and his family, we really marvel that such heroes have been able to live among us. He gave up everything to protect his neighbors and extend the blessings of freedom to millions who have never known it. He was proud of his country and of the Marines that he served with. Mr. Speaker, in honor of Lance Corporal Greninger, we need to regularly thank our servicemen and women and pray for their safe return each and every day. We honor the service and the memory of Lance Corporal Greninger and commit ourselves to follow his example of patriotic duty, honor, and sacrifice in our daily walk as Americans. Semper Fi, Lance Corporal. I yield back the balance of my time.
yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On June 26th, the roadside bomb in Jalula, Iraq, claimed the life of a young man from Oroville, California. He was Army Staff Sergeant Russell Jeremiah Proctor, age 25, on his third tour of combat duty. He was laid to rest last week in solemn ceremonies in California. Sergeant Proctor leaves behind a grieving widow, a devastated family, and a 9-month-old son who will know his father only by reputation. And it is reputation I want to speak of today. I never met Sergeant Proctor. I, too, know him only by reputation. It is a reputation commemorated by, among other decorations, 2 Army Commendation Medals, 2 Army Achievement Medals, 2 Army Good Conduct Medals, the National Defense Service Medal, the Iraqi Campaign Medal with Bronze Service Star, the Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, 2 Overseas Service Ribbons, a Combat Action Badge, the Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart. It's a reputation memorialized by those who knew him best, the men he served with. He was a leader among leaders, said one. His drive to be the best motivated all of us to reach our potential. Another said, he led from the front. He inspired everyone around him to better themselves. Perhaps the most poignant was this simple post on a local newspaper site. My son was killed with Sergeant Proctor. Private First Class Dylan Johnson and the rest of the soldiers in the unit all looked up to Russell for leadership and guidance. They are both heroes to me as well. It's signed, A Grieving Dad. I had the honor to speak last week with Sergeant Proctor's widow, Sola. She's also active duty Army. They met while serving at Fort Hood. She was deployed at the same forward operating base as Russell. They were billeted together. She was nearby when he was killed. I cannot begin to imagine the hell that she has been through. And yet, having endured all this, she plans to continue her service to our country in the U.S. Army. Mr. Speaker, James Michener's question thunders down upon us at times like these. Where do we get such people? As I talked with Sola last Monday, I was struck by the transcendent nobility that accompanies her grief. Perhaps a more pertinent question is, what would our country do without such people as Sergeant Proctor, or the 9 generations of Americans who preceded him in the defense of our nation? General Patton was right when he observed, it is foolish and wrong to mourn the men who died. Rather, we should thank God that such men lived. And so, Mr. Speaker, I rise today for exactly that purpose, to thank God that Russell Proctor lived, and to pray that his infant son Ezekiel grows up in a nation made safer by his sacrifice, and a nation that will never forget not only what we owe to those who Lincoln called the loved and lost, but what we owe to the families who so personally bear that loss. A chaplain who brought the dread news to the family wrote a commentary over the 4th of July weekend, a weekend filled with barbecues and picnics and fireworks, in which he noted the grief of this family amidst all of the frivolity around them. And he noted that at age 25, Russell Proctor will never again celebrate a birthday, take his son fishing, or hug his wife. Sergeant Russell Proctor and all those who preceded him since the first shots on Lexington Green believed enough in our country and what it stands for to sacrifice all those precious years of love and life and joy so that we, their fellow Americans, could enjoy those same blessings of liberty and safety and security, including a baby boy named Ezekiel, whose dad won't be there to take him fishing or hug him or celebrate birthdays with him. Ezekiel, if you should someday stumble upon these words, I hope you'll know that, like you, many of us knew your dad only by reputation, and we stood in awe of him. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Clark, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'm asking this House and this Congress to cut the debt that's truly crushing the American people right now. The debt that Americans and American families have to pay month after month, year after year, without any help from anyone else. It's a direct burden on our people. And I'm not talking about the federal debt. I'm talking about the debt that Americans must pay on their mortgages and on their student loans. So today I'm offering a resolution to strongly urge this body that as we work to prevent the government from defaulting on its obligations, that we do the same thing to help the American people, that with equal intensity and drive and commitment, we work to help Americans free themselves of debt. Now, if we help the American people reduce their debt burden, that's going to help our families to be more financially secure. Now, yes, jobs are important. I represent Metro Detroit, a region that has one of the highest unemployment rates in the country. But you know what? I know folks that are working, they have jobs, but they don't have any money because all of their income is going to pay off creditors. Creditors. That's outrageous. And you know, a couple of days ago, I made a big issue to the American people about not borrowing and handling their money responsibly. The reason why I said that is because many of us think that being in debt is the American way. It's not. This country was founded on the principles based on the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, that we all have a God-given right to life, to liberty, to the pursuit of happiness. But who can be free when you're drowning in debt? So I'm urging this Congress, cut the mortgages, forgive the student loans. That'll help American families be secure. But also this, by reducing that debt burden that Americans have to directly pay, that'll create more jobs. Because that'll free up money that Americans are earning for themselves. So instead of spending it on creditors, they can save that money, they can invest it, they can spend it responsibly on businesses who in turn will hire more people. That's how you create jobs in a sustainable way. It's by helping Americans get out of debt. Yes, Americans have a responsibility to manage their own finances. But so does Congress have the duty to help Americans get out of the debt that this body over years helped put people into debt by changing the laws, by allowing lenders to loan money under terms and target certain people with the sole objective to put the American public into debt, into a debt that they can't repay or would take them a lifetime to free themselves of, we have that responsibility and that obligation. I'm going to close because the underlying point I'm trying to make is this. Yes, the federal government is important. How the federal government manages its money is important. This debt is critical that we manage it properly. We have to avoid default because if this government goes into default, everyone's interest rates on their loans are going to go up. That could force people into bankruptcy, force folks into foreclosure, and ruin property values for everyone else. Just so you know, property values have been ruined because of foreclosure. So if we help homeowners stay in their homes by modifying their loans, that's going to save the property values of other homeowners who never missed a payment. Because you are the same homeowners right now that can't sell your home to pay off your mortgage. You can't retire. You are depending on selling your home to pay off your mortgage, but you can't do it because your other neighbors are so underwater they had to walk away from their homes or had to be evicted because of foreclosure. So by helping families reduce their debt, that helps all of us in America. It helps our American economy. You see, this country is a great country. Our economy has been a strong one, not necessarily because of government, but because of the American people. So you know what, folks? If we want this economy to rebound, let's make sure that Americans are financially secure, and one of the most effective ways to do that is to free Americans from mortgage and student loan debt. And I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Westmoreland, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As an elected member of Congress, I have the honor to serve and represent the people of the 3rd District of Georgia through my voting record and through participation in the lawmaking process. Georgia's Spalding County Sheriff, James D. Stewart, represented his community through selfless service to his county, his deputy, and the thousands of citizens who elected him to the 4 terms to be their protector. I come before the House today with a heavy heart to honor the nearly 40 years of law enforcement service that was brought to a premature end on July the 3rd when Sheriff Stewart was killed in an automobile accident while on his daily patrol. I hope that one day my staff and my friends will talk about me the same way they did D. Stewart's co-workers and friends at his funeral. He was the kind of man who always led from the front. Even though he was the head of the department, it would often be his voice that came across the radio responding to calls no matter what time of day or night. He would rather put his life on the line than let anyone else cover for him. A man who valued his duty more than his sleep. Sheriff Stewart really gave his personal cell number to anyone readily and made sure that everyone knew that he was available to them 24/7. That set him apart and contributed to his reputation as a man who really cared about the people of Spalding County. Chief Deputy Major Teresa Bishop called Sheriff Stewart the greatest boss ever after 29 years of working together. He trusted his deputies to do their job and expected them to be accountable too. His humor made his employees look forward to each workday, but he took his responsibility very seriously, especially when it came to the safety of children and the elderly. Sheriff Stewart is remembered as having a huge heart, a heart as big as Spalding County. In a testament to the number of lives touched by Sheriff Stewart's service, his funeral procession took nearly 20 minutes to pass by. I stand here on behalf of his wife Janice, his children Jay, Hope, Joey, Darren, his 11 grandchildren, and everyone who knew James D. Stewart as more than just a sheriff, but as a preacher, a marriage counselor, and a friend, a father, and a husband. The Bible says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." And Sheriff Stewart embodied that verse. Thank you for your service, Sheriff. The people of Spalding County lost a great man on July the 3rd, but your memory will live on. Many others will be inspired by your example to live justly and with kindness. You will be missed. See you later, Dee. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of this House, I am pleased to rise with my colleague and dear friend Barbara Lee to focus on an issue that all too frequently is ignored. I rise to speak as we are engaged in an extraordinarily important discussion, debate, and responsibility. That responsibility is to ensure that America pays its bills, that America's creditworthiness is not put at risk, that America, which has incurred obligations, meets those obligations to individuals and to others, as we have made policies which have cost money, and it is now necessary for us to pay the bills that we have already incurred. But as we engage in that debate and discussion, we must remember that there are, in our country, 1 child out of every 5 who is living in poverty, who is worried about proper food, proper housing, proper medical care. Children who are, in fact, at risk. We now, in America, the richest nation on the face of the earth, have the largest number of people living in poverty that we have had in over 7 decades. And so as we engage in this debate, it is important that we take this time to focus on those who all too often are invisible, who all too often are not the center of our discussion, who all too often are perceived to simply be those who will not matter at the voting booth. Each of us in this House has a compass formed in many respects by our faiths. My faith teaches me that I have a responsibility to my God to reach out to the least among us, to lift them up, to care for them, to clothe them, to feed them, to house them, to make sure that as a part of our American family, they are not forgotten. They are not by negligence driven more deeply into despair, unhealth, sickness, and a negative lifestyle which costs us all and costs those individuals. I come from the state of Maryland, and I want to quote somebody you think it may be unusual for me to quote, but I was elected to the state Senate in 1966. Ted Agnew was elected governor of our state in 1966, and he was inaugurated 2 weeks after I was sworn in as a member of the state Senate at the age of 27. And in his inaugural address, he said this, that the cost of failure far exceeds the price of progress. And what he meant by that, the failure to invest in the welfare of our people, as well as our infrastructure and the creation of jobs and the expansion of opportunity for our people, the failure to make those investments would, in the long run, cost us far more than the investments would cost us in the short run. My colleagues, I suggest to you that our failure to invest in the welfare of all of our citizens will cost us far greater sums in the long run for the failure to invest in the short run. And so I congratulate Barbara Lee from California for making sure that the least of us are not forgotten in this very important debate. Do we need to bring down spending? We do. But one of the interesting facets of every report that has been issued in a bipartisan way, most recently by the so-called Gang of Six, or the Simpson-Bowles Commission, or the Senator Domenici Alice Rivlin Commission, all had a central premise: do not take action that undermines the most vulnerable among us. Those were all bipartisan commissions. I know my friends on the Republican side of the aisle who pride themselves on being the party of Lincoln understand Lincoln's message of healing, of bringing us together, of making sure that we lifted up our fellow citizens and cared for the sick and for the homeless, for the young, and yes, for the old. So I, as I said, thank Chairwoman Lee, such an extraordinarily courageous and powerful voice on behalf of those who sometimes have no voice. I am pleased to join my voice to hers, and hopefully to all 435 of us who have been given the privilege of serving in this body, to raise our voices on this day on behalf of a nation that has been perceived around the world as being a nation of hope, of opportunity, of heart, and of soul. Let us reflect that in whatever way we go forward in ensuring the fiscal health of our nation, both in the short term and in the long term, and understand that the health of our people, physically, mentally, financially, will be equally important to the health of our nation. And I thank the gentlelady for leading this debate, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Canseco, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise requesting unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, if one were to ask the average American what their top 3 priorities for the Congress to work on would be, I think you would get the answer of jobs, jobs, and more jobs. That's the answer because the employment situation in America is not good. Over 14 million Americans are out of work. We've had 29 straight months with the unemployment rate at 8% or higher, and monthly jobs reports that show anemic job growth. Clearly, we need to turn our economy around so that robust job creation can occur. The American people want and expect nothing less. Much of why our economy is not creating jobs is because of uncertainty in the economy that has been created by policies passed by Washington, like the government takeover of health care, the credit-restricting financial regulation bill, and the out-of-control spending. We tried it the way desired by President Obama and Washington liberals, attempting to spend and borrow our way to a better economy. And their bills, all they did was add to the debt that is dragging the economy down. Worse, though, is that Washington is ignoring 3 very easy actions that, if taken, will immediately help our economy. There are 3 pending free trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea that will create jobs and are at no cost to the taxpayer. Altogether, it's estimated by the Business Roundtable that these 3 agreements will create 250,000 jobs. How can we not pass these agreements that will create jobs and not cost the taxpayers? Today I want to talk about the benefits of the Panama Free Trade Agreement. In 2010, U.S. exports to Panama accounted for $6.1 billion, creating $5.7 billion in trade surpluses with Panama. The United States is Panama's largest trading partner, and once the agreement goes into effect, 88% of U.S. goods will enter Panama duty-free. What are some of the products that we export to Panama that could benefit from this agreement? Well, our top exports to Panama now are aircraft, machinery, and agricultural products. In the 23rd District of Texas, which I have the privilege of representing in the United States House of Representatives, agriculture is an important source of economic activity. The Panama Free Trade Agreement will help agricultural products in my district and those districts across the United States. This agreement is helping level the playing field for American agricultural producers. In 2009, the U.S. exported $362 million in agricultural exports to Panama. Less than 40% of those exports received duty-free status, while more than 99% of Panama's agricultural exports to the United States received duty-free status. Upon implementation of the agreement, 56% of U.S. agricultural exports will enter Panama duty-free, and the remaining tariffs will phase out within 15 years. While there are benefits to passing this agreement, there are also consequences for failing to pass it. American jobs are at stake as our competitors, notably Canada and the European Union, have their own trade deals with Panama. And once these deals are implemented, their exports will have an advantage over U.S. exports currently going into Panama. This will lead to a loss of market share for the United States exporters and a loss of jobs here at home. Mr. Speaker, we have the ability to create jobs without spending taxpayer money. With over 14 million Americans unemployed, we must stop waiting. It's time to pass the Panama Free Trade Agreement. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Mrs. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend and submit extraneous material for the record.
Without objection.
I rise today as the founding co-chair of the Congressional Out of Poverty Caucus to join my colleagues to discuss the urgent crises of poverty and to provide a voice for those people living in poverty here in our Congress in terms of our voices and who we feel that could get disproportionately hurt by any negotiations that take place that cut too deeply. I want to thank our leadership, especially our whip, Mr. Hoyer, for his powerful words this morning and for his leadership, Leader Pelosi, and our assistant leader, Mr. Clyburn, for each and every day standing and working for the least of these. Mr. Speaker, a daunting statistic speaks for itself. 1 in 5 million children in America are growing up in poverty, and nearly 45 million Americans are living in poverty today. Our national unemployment rate is 9.2%, but for African Americans it is 16.2%, and for Latinos it is 11.6%. And we know it's twice these statistics given the millions of people who have lost hope in looking for jobs. Given these heart-wrenching statistics, the Congressional Out of Poverty Caucus, our co-chairs, Representative Baca, Butterfield, Conyers, and Honda, and myself, we sent a letter to the President, the Vice President, and the congressional leadership on both sides of the aisle, asking them to protect those programs that support those facing or living in poverty in the debt ceiling negotiations. My colleagues and I are here on the floor today to remind every member that it was not American families or children or the working poor that forced Congress to run a deficit. And it definitely was not America's seniors on Social Security or Medicare or people on Medicaid that forced Republicans to turn the first budget surplus into decades of record deficits. Two wars, massive tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires, big oil, Wall Street running wild caused these deficits. The American people are willing to work, they want to work, and pay their fair share, but they should not be asked to fill a hole that they did not dig. We should quickly pass clean legislation to raise our debt ceiling, to end this default crisis so that we can move on doing the critical work of creating jobs and responsibly addressing the national debt. Making heartless cuts on the backs of hungry children and struggling American families will not balance the budget. Every member of Congress should consider the millions of Americans who are struggling to find work, struggling to pay for health care if they have health care, struggling to stay in their homes, and struggling to feed their children. Mr. Speaker, more and more Americans are facing poverty every day, and the Congressional Out of Poverty Caucus is on the floor once again to be the voice for these Americans struggling day in and day out just to survive, demanding that we protect these vital safety net programs and help support the poor, especially in this great recession. We are here today to share some stories from people who have benefited from those programs. And I have a story from Veronica, who lives in Northern California and who has turned her life around under these vital safety net programs. Her story is one of hardship and survival. It's a story of getting back up when life knocks you down. It's a story of America. She is the American dream, but she and her spouse were teenage parents. They relied on public assistance to bring up their children, were able to get good jobs, and they got off of federal assistance. Well, in 1995, the bottom fell out. Their son was diagnosed with diabetes. Her world imploded. She tried to go back to work full-time, and her son needed more care at home. And she was given child care assistance so she could support her family and her son. She was offered counseling and job training, and in the fall of 2009, the opportunity, mind you, to work at Second Harvest Food Bank as an administrative assistant through the federal stimulus program. She said she's still married to her husband. They have 3 beautiful children, and there's no way she could have kept her family together without the help of such programs such as SNAP, food stamps, Medi-Cal, and job training. We found, and she said, unknown strength, faith, and resilience in our downfall, and we'll do everything that we can do to stay self-sufficient, but cannot say enough about the blessed safety net. Mr. Speaker, we understand that even when you work hard and do things right, sometimes everyone needs a helping hand, especially when there are no jobs. And I personally needed this helping hand in years past when I was forced, during many hardships that I was faced with, that I had to rely on for many years public assistance and food stamps and Medi-Cal just to get through school, to take care of my kids, to get a job. And if it weren't for that safety net, I would not be here today. And so let me just ask all of you to remember the poor, remember those struggling to survive, and to support those people who have exhausted their benefits, their unemployment benefits. They've hit the wall in 99 weeks. We need to add more weeks of unemployment compensation for individuals who deserve this help. The 99ers need help. We need to do this. We need to do more to create jobs. We need to help people survive until we have the vision and the backbone to do that here. Thank you again.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, for 5 minutes.
I'm conflicted as I come to the floor today, Mr. Speaker. I'd actually planned to talk about tax reform this morning. The Ways and Means Committee, for the first time in 10 years, is holding a hearing on the fair tax next Tuesday, July 26th. The fair tax is a proposal that abolishes the income tax system in this country that punishes people based on what they earn and creates a consumption tax that rewards people based on how much they save. And as we talk about poverty here this morning, as we talk about how to get folks back on their feet, the problem in this country, Mr. Speaker, is not that we don't bring in enough revenue, it's that we spend too much money, that there's a bias in our culture now towards consumption as opposed to thrift. Now, when did that happen? I wish I were a better student of history. I know that Ben Franklin shared with us that a penny saved is a penny earned. I know that our colleagues in the past said if we talk about $1 million here and $1 million there, pretty soon we're talking about real money. My grandfather was a United Methodist minister in South Georgia Conference. He was Navy chaplain during World War II, went down and worked the South Georgia Circuit after the war. They'd get together and get all the little nubs of the candles that they would have during the year, and